In this lesson, I'm going to wrap up all the sculpting. I'm going to get the meshes that need to be welded done and sculpted to completion. And then I'm going to get the fluid meshes that are going to be sitting on top of a majority of these ingredients. After this lesson, it'll be all render tests, UVing, texturing, and shading. If there's any sculpting, it'll be reparative sculpting that I have to do if I find anything wrong at the rendering or texturing stage. So I mentioned in the previous lesson that I want to create a version of this bottom bun and its sauce that are welded together. It makes it look more cohesive. And I also want to do the same thing for this bottom patty and its cheese. But they're going to be copies. I'm still going to keep these two and I'm still going to texture both versions. I want to see which one looks better. And I'm going to finish all the ZBrush sculpting with the fluid meshes. There are going to be several different types. There's going to be one major one that's draping over these 4 ingredients, and then a whole bunch of different types that I have planned that are really going to help to sell the liquid that's coming out of the meat and the liquidated cheese and all that stuff. So I'm going to start with the lower bun and its sauce. Both of these pieces are at their highest subdivision level. So the top sauce, that's sub D5, and the bottom bun is sub D6. I'll make sure both of them are on. And all I'm going to do is go merge folder to create a copy of them. And there seems to be an issue. So I'm going to delete this and go find what's wrong. One of these have a layer, probably recording. Yeah, this one has a layer. And check the other one. I'm sure it's fine. Yeah, all the layers are closed. So I'm going to go merge folder. I'm going to take this merged copy, and it's very important now that I turn it into a Dynamesh because I'm about to do a lot of projection, and these are several different surfaces. This top one has 2. This bun has just 1. It's one singular mesh, but what I mean by that is if I was to look at this, it has 2 layers, 2 surfaces, and this one is just 1, right? But that's a total of 3. And when you're projecting, things like this matter. Sometimes the projector will get confused about which surface it's supposed to be pulling from. It's best if I'm able to unify this into one piece, cohesive piece, and that in itself is going to start helping to create some good transitions. But after that, there's still a certain amount of work I have to do because these transitions are very cheap and very, very bad, very evident that they are separate meshes. If you look at the reference, let me pull it up. There is so much unification here. There's so much cohesion. Like sometimes you'll see that there's sauce, but you can still see the bun underneath it, right? So there's very good transitions, and this is what I'm going to try to simulate with hand sculpting. I'm going to start by Dynameshing, and I know I'm going to need a lot of geometry, so I'm going to open this dot, this resolution dot. It allows it to use the most amount of geometry, and I'm going to go really close so that I can monitor how much detail is being lost as I Dynamesh. So I'm going to hit Dynamesh at 1000. And yeah, that's definitely not enough because I'm going to lose everything, all my detail. I want to make sure that it happens with nothing changing in view. Everything should remain the same. So I'm going to go significantly higher, 3400. That is good. And the transition is pretty cool too, but I'm going to undo it, and I'm going to, yeah, that was a fair amount lost. I want to duplicate this just so I have a copy of it that I can compare with the up and down key. And solo's on, and this time I'm going to really go the highest I can go. So that's 4K. And then I'm going to, with the dot open, I'm going to go Dynamesh. Okay. A little amount was lost, but I think I can get that data back. So I'm going to hit the up key, Yeah, there's a little bit of contrast lost, which is, it's not that bad. This is the original. This is the welded Dynamesh version. I don't think it's that bad. I think if it comes down to it, I can pull some of the data from the bun. It's more so the bun I'm worried about keeping all the information for, and the contrast. So still good. Hit up here. Yeah, in small areas like this, but in areas like this region over here, there's gonna be blending, a lot of blending done to sell this transition as sauce and bun. So I'm not too worried about it. And I always have the original bun mesh, which you're going to see me do something very interesting with this original bun before I start the actual sculpting. This original one is the merged. So let me rename this as merged lower bun and sauce. This is rename, I'll just call this Dyna. And now it's time to create the final topology from this. So I'm going to use for the projection. So I'm going to duplicate this one more time, turn on wireframe, and I'm going to use 5K Z remesh at 5K. I'm going to go Z remesh. All right, so this is the final piece of geometry. It looks pretty good. 5K, not bad at all. The projection process. Then all I need is the Dynamesh version, the nice watertight version. And start the projection process. I'm going to turn off color, divide, and project. Divide, project, divide, project. Keep going, divide, project. Let's see how much more we're gonna need. I'm gonna hit up. And there's definitely more information that needs to be extracted, and we're at 1.7 mil, so that's nothing. So I'm going to go divide and save, just in case we get a crash. Project. I'm going to look at my bun here, my original, and then compare it to this. And what I'm going to do is just turn it on. And I might also do this for the sauce, but I'm just going to do a masking of this region. Actually, first I'm going to look at how many polygons this has. This has 19 million, and this one is 12 million. I think I could get away with one more subdivision on this thing. So I'm going to divide it. And that's 28 million, and that's a good amount of topology for the highest subdivision level. What I'm going to do is just to pull all the bun information, make sure I clear all masks and solo. I'm going to mask these regions here. And I'm going to do one more projection from the actual original meshes. So I'm going to mask all of this. I'm going to speed through the masking of these little pockets. I'm going to try as much as possible to get a lot of it. I don't really care about the bottom is fine. But all this detail that I spent time increasing contrast for in specific areas, I want to make sure I keep all of it. I'll be back with all of it masked. All right, so here's the entire bun masked on this final mesh, and I'm going to invert, and I'm going to do a projection. I'll do a quick save. Okay, and the objective is to pull every last bit of detail from this thing. So this is the original mesh, very high fidelity, high contrast. This just lost a little bit of data, so I'm going to extract the last bit of information. So I'm going to project. This should not take as long because I'm only projecting to a region. So I'm going to go project. Yeah, and now all the data has been pulled and it looks pretty good. Right, so if I compare this to my original Dynamesh version, it looks a little softer. And this one has all that high fidelity detail pulled for the bun. Let me make sure I label this as lower bun and sauce merged. There are a few errors like here. I have to repair it. Yeah, they're in quite a few places. So what I'm going to do is undo until I get my mask back. So this region here definitely has errors, 1, 2, and that region there also has an error. Let me see if I can find any more. Counted 4 so far. All right, so I'm going to undo until I get my mask back, because it looks like those areas might have been caught up. And I'm going to also undo, yeah, they were caught up for sure. So I'm going to make sure they are masked properly, so the system is not trying to pull anything from them. And next time, as soon as I project, I have to really check those, but this was also problematic here. So it looks like this is also, some of it was exposed. For this to work, none of the sauce region should be exposed. And then the other place was somewhere in this region, I think. Yeah, this might have been it right there. And actually, just to be safe, I'm going to do a grow mask to give myself a little bit more cushion. So I'll do a grow mask and do it at a lower subdivision level. One more time, grow mask. Good enough. And then I'm going to project one more time and then scan it, make sure there are no errors. And a project. All right, so that's it. Now I'm going to carefully tumble to make sure there are no errors. Now that you've seen how I'm going to refine it, just like tumble, mask out any regions of the sauce that are trying to project, and then reproject, I'm going to just stop the video and get it done, and I'll come back so we can move to the next stage. I don't want you to watch me do the same thing since you've seen how I'm going to be troubleshooting. I've done the final inspection and I have no more errors. So for the next step, I want to perform a varied projection that allows me to start a better transition between this sauce and this bread. And the way I've resolved to do that is to mask these transitions with a very blurred mask and then project, not at full intensity, back onto this original lower bun. So let me give an example of what it is that I'm talking about. And this is something I want to do on a lower subdivision level, because if I can do it on the lower subdivision level, I don't lose any of this refined detail, this really high fidelity detail. So an example of what I'm talking about is, let's say I move down to about, and this would be like what I can classify as primary, the primary stage of creating this transition. The final stage will be done by hand to get a refined sculpt. This is just the start. So what I'm talking about is, let's say I mask this region here, right? I decide that this region, I want it to be, to blend better with the bun, right? I'm first going to blur it enough time so that this is not at full intensity. And in addition to that, I'm going to go to my projection settings and I'm going to see of which of these values I'm supposed to be playing with to get a less intense projection. So let me start by just using the default settings. If I go project, yeah. So that right there, this is after, this is before. So this is what I would be accepting. I think what I'm going to have to do is more blurring. So I'm going to have to count on blurring of this mask to get a projection that is not 100%. So I'm going to blur a few more times, blur mask. And at this stage, with as much blurring as is happening right now, if I invert and I project, yeah, I get some kind of a partial projection, right? And the more I blur, the more partial that projection is going to be. But already this is a fairly good transition, right? That is almost looking more unified, but it will require more sculpting. And the important thing about this is that if I was to go to a higher subdivision level, all my detail is still there, but there will be like a transitionary line that I may or may not want. And if I don't want it, I'll be at this subdivision level trying to blend it in. What I'm going to do is go around and do this kind of masking, this initial masking. And the thing here is that I want to be careful not to get every edge, because if I look at the reference, there's some areas where the transition between the bun and the sauce is very evident, very crisp. And some areas where it's a lot more better transition, it's more unified, more cohesive, because there is not as thick of a layer of sauce. So I'm going to have to try to simulate that by making sure, if I'm trying to simulate this, I have more blurring here, and over here I have a tighter mask to maintain this crisp edge. So you're going to see me vary the mask selection across the edges to get different results. And you might also see me do something like mask this entire island here to make it blend more with the bread, because as you can see, it's thin layer of sauce. So the bread is showing through and the transition is seamless. You can barely see what's happening. So let me get started. All right, so I'm going to start with this randomized mask. And to help myself, I'm going to try to pick an alpha that's a little bit more interesting so that I'm getting a more randomized selection. If this is not good enough, I'll use when the blurring is done, because it's already coming in at different intensities. So that's good. And as I mentioned, this would be like an internal island where the transition is better to indicate that it's a thin layer of sauce. All right, so I'm gonna go around and look at these transitions and give them a wash. I'll make sure that the thinner layers are at the bottom, because it'll mean that it thins out as it pours from the source. So this should be where it's the thickest, at the top. And really thin strands like this, I'm going to be a little bit more okay with obliterating that clean separation, because it's supposed to be a thinner strand of sauce in this crevice. I'll come back around and refine this mask, clean it up a bit. Here is the mask all around. Now, before I do this blurring and projection, I'm going to store a morph target, because that's another way that I can reintroduce some of these edges if I feel like this projection is too aggressive. All right, I was going to put it on a layer, but I don't want to deal with too many layers right now because this file is getting big, and I think a morph target should suffice. So I'm going to store a morph target, and I'm going to invert the mask, and just stepping down a few subdivision levels already will blur the mask to some degree. Okay, so I'm going to do some additional blurring as much as I did before. Let me do the projection and see if this blurring is enough to give me a good averaging and a good transition. Make sure my bun is on, my original bun, because that's the lower surface, and that's what is going to be controlling the averaging between the transitionary regions. Project. Okay. So that's the first attempt. There are some weird errors in certain areas. Looks like I'm telling you to do too much over here. I'll project again. I masked that. Morph target brush. If I was to take, actually, let me see what I have so far. So if I was to take my morph target brush, that's another way to fix these bad regions. I'll take my morph and bring back what was. Anyway, I think that it's good, just a bit, it's somewhat aggressive. So I'm going to undo and try to protect some of these regions. I'll start with fixing the errors first. I'll protect some of these regions that are producing a lot of errors. And we'll go one more time. And now that I think about it, I think using a layer would be really good with this because I can lower the intensity. I'm going to add a layer in addition to having a morph target. Make sure I'm at the higher subdivision level and add a layer and then go back down to 4 and project. Tumble around, find out why this particular region is problematic. Just to minimize how much of these errors I deal with, I'm going to mask those ones. And then get this too, because they want to be misbehave. Okay, not as many errors. Proceed with this mesh. I'm going to remove the mask and I'm going to see what happens when I go back to the higher subdivision level and reduce the intensity of this layer. So if I was to go 0.5, yeah, so I can control how much of that transition is happening. So I go 0.7, 0.8. All right, so now I have two ways to bring back some of that detail. You can go down to 4. See what it's looking like. Okay. All right, so this is the first initial or larger scale attempt at creating this transition. This prominent line is going to be there. I want to keep it in some areas as I mentioned, but in other areas I'm going to be doing hand sculpting to make these work better. So this is a good initial mesh. Duplicating this. And then I'm doing the projection on this one. So I get to keep this original. And I'm going to delete this merge and this dotted mesh because I don't need them anymore. This file size is going to get very big. And keep this and start working this. Now what I'm going to do is go to a subdivision level 6 or stay on 7 and then go in here and start sculpting this. I think I'm going to stay on 7 because if I go to 6, all the work that I do will have to be redone at 7 to deal with this transition line. So I'll stay at 7 here and I'm going to come back and do some manual building to marry these two pieces together. I decided to go with a 0.7 instead. I can still change it later, but I'm probably not going to. I think 0.7 is good. It's enough of what automation can offer to do this blending. Now it's time to do some manual sculpting. So I'm going to add a layer and start doing these fixes. And what I'm going to do is, just to not distract myself, I'm going to mask by quadrants and just focus on making sure a quadrant is working well. So I'm going to go like maybe here. So for here, I'm going to grab my builder brush. I'm going to get a alpha 6 to get nice soft transitions, and definitely want to reduce my intensity and start seeing that might be too low. Let me find a good number. Yeah, this is a good setting to transition. I'm going to try to respect all the granular detail that's over here. And what I'm simulating is good transition between I'm going to try to go with varied abstract shapes instead of same type of shapes. The kind of build-up I'm doing is going to obliterate these details, so I have to be careful about that. And the objective is to blend well, so I don't want any brush stroke like results, which is kind of what I'm getting. As long as there are not any noticeable brush strokes. Good. Well, as long as they're abstract shapes that blend into the forms around them. Okay, with this. That transition. This is, go a few subdivision levels lower and try to change this shape a bit. Alright, see how that's impacting. And the objective here is to create some just attractive sculpting. So Sometimes it's surprising what type of detail makes an organic piece look accurate. It's not always all like this soft mounding. Sometimes it's like harsh shapes. And selective areas help. I guess because ultimately it's all randomized detail works always better than just the same type of information, even if it feels soft and organic. If it's not randomized, it has the potential to not make the piece so. I'm going to keep doing this at the build up, just these really interesting shapes. I'm trying to go for every type of shape. I'm not going to do the same thing all the way around because that's not going to work to give a great result. And I'm also going to be careful not to do it to every single edge. As I mentioned, some of them need to remain a pristine edge to match the reference. And every once in a while, I'm going to just go out like this and just take a look at it. Make sure that it looks good from a distance. And I'll also switch between materials so that the new cavity map can show me where I'm not doing a good job. I'm going to speed through this and come back every time I have something important to contribute. If I want to add like big shapes, like here, I want to do some blending to add big shapes, always go down to lower subdivision levels so you don't obliterate the detail. You can blend a little bit better. Right there. Help improve the transition. Alright, I'm going to try to go through and get just like an initial pass and then look at it as a collective. I'm going to try to polygroup the regions I do, and so that I can keep track of what is already has received a pass. So this is a region I'm done with, and I have to be very careful to make sure that all these bubbly masses I'm creating are initially are blending really well with their surroundings. I want to look at them and just have them feel like isolated islands that don't make a lot of sense. So I'm gonna go in here and really wash to make sure that it's blending. And this is something that works better at a distance. I want them to be in there, but not to stand out. The eye shouldn't be able to just outline them like that. It doesn't feel too organic. here. So I'll go in there and create them, but I'll always zoom out when I'm done and try to unify. And as I mentioned before, it might become very hard to tell what the difference is, but I always have my original mesh as a guide to let me know where the transition was. So if I have issues painting, which I won't, I'm pretty sure I can distinguish between the bread and the sauce right now. And in Substance Painter, I will be able to tell the difference too. This mesh will be there with a different shader, so I can always switch back and forth. Or I can create some type of mask here and send it to Substance Painter to help me see where those regions are. Things like this really prominent abstract shape I'm gonna keep. I think they really, this is what I was talking about, help to sell these like organic forms when every once in a while there's this really weird abstract shape that doesn't look like it blends in with the rest, especially for something like this. It's these ingredients inside everything, the baked bread and the sauce. All right, so I'm gonna go back in there and keep giving these edges the treatment, and then I'll zoom out like this and stop marrying them. But when I'm down there, I won't focus too much on how badly they may be doing. I'll do what I have to do, and then I'll zoom out and stop marrying them. All right, so I managed to get all the way around and I'm done. I think this is enough. I like it, it looks really cool. I felt like in the beginning, I went a little bit too far with the blending, but now I realize it's fine because there's a lot of places where there's seamless transition. So it's good that I have that and I can still distinguish between the bread. But as I mentioned before, I can just switch back and forth between these two meshes to see where my original lines were. And this particular mesh will give me my original leak, so I can go back and forth between it. Right now, it's hard to visualize how the separation is going to exist, but when the paintwork comes in, it will make a lot of sense. And this is also an alternative option. This option still exists in separate form. I'm going to try to paint both of them to see which one works better. But I think this is it. This is going to work really well. I've decided to not weld this bottom patty to this cheese. I don't think it's necessary because I'm going to be creating a fluid mesh that drapes over it, and I think it's going to do a good enough job unifying this piece. And if any blending needs to be done, if I need to make some of this burger looks like it's more fused with cheese, or I need to make any of this cheese look like the burger is poking through, it's a much easier thing to do with paint at the painting stage. And with the fluid mesh draping over it, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna look cohesive. So I'm going to refrain from blending this. It's time to wrap up this lesson with the creation of the fluid meshes and the extracting of this charred meat over here. With the fluid meshes, there's going to be two types. The first type is going to be the fluid that's in the crevices of this meat of both patties. So I'm going to get that. And then the next one is going to be a sheet, a fluid mesh that's a sheet that sort of drapes over this cheese all the way down to the sauce here. It's going to start from underneath the top patty, so around here. And when it's time to shade it, I'll make sure that I'm getting a nice gradation in opacity so that you don't see a very clear transition of the sheet from where it starts to where it ends. So there's going to be a lot of painting done to hide that. The rest of the areas where there appears to be fluid, like here, this one that's between the English cucumber and the sauce, I will designate to roughness. I'll paint a very low roughness at this edge, or what would be a very high glossiness, so that every time the light hits this, it catches this wetness here. If I have to, I'll come back and create another fluid mesh, but I don't think I need it. If I'm inspecting it in the next lesson, I'm going to be inspecting the fluid meshes that I create in this lesson. I feel like I need to, I'll come back and create fluid meshes for these cucumbers, but I think I can sell this with painting good roughness. So let's get started with the fluid meshes. I'm going to create the ones for the patties first, and then I'll finish with the sheet-like one because that one needs some sculpting. It needs some sculpting to give it interesting detail so that the transmission settings in Maya can work with more interesting mesh to produce more interesting results for this fluid. Some very interesting shapes here, droplets, a lot of good droplets here that all had to be sculpted, and then some really noisy patterns in some areas. I have to figure out how to do that without doing too much, but I have an idea. I'm going to start with fluid meshes that are in the crevices of the patties. Let me start with the top patty chunks. As you know, they're all in pieces, and I did put the onions in this folder. I'm going to take them out, let them sit up top so that I only have the patties in here. Actually, I might want to keep these onions in there because these onions are sort of welded into the patty. So those ones, I'm going to keep them in here. And let me look at what this one is. Okay, this is the charred meat. I might want to also keep this. Actually, I'm going to keep both of these. I'm going to keep the charred meat for the top patty and its onions in its folder. And then what I'm going to do is merge the folder to create a copy of everything. So we'll merge folder. Okay, it's good that it hid the folder. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom chunks. So the bottom chunks are also 4 pieces each. And they have onions too. Merge this folder too. Patty. All right, so it has everything in there. And the next thing I'm going to do is dynamesh this because I want to turn them into one mesh. I'm looking for a singular surface that I can mask cavities onto. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to make sure I retain a lot of this detail with this singular surface. So I'm going to start a dynamesh at about 2600 and I'll go dynamesh. Okay, that's pretty good. Go back and forth to see how much detail was lost. And that's a fair amount of detail lost. So I'm going to crank this up to the max. It's best to retain as much of the detail as possible. Go back here and I'll crank this up, open-ended, and do a dynamesh again, 4K. Okay, this is now one singular mesh. And before I come to it, I'm going to do the same thing here with the bottom patty. Crank it up, keep this open-ended, and dynamesh. It seems to have subdivision levels. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to delete lower. Yet again, dynamesh at 4K. Okay, so these are our 2 copies that are going to be used to create cavity masks. Now the next thing I'm going to do is make sure that I am only dealing with the part of the surface that's exposed, because these are really large pieces. And if I mask by cavity, it's going to be a very expensive operation, and I really don't even want to deal with that much geometry. I just need fluid on the exposed part of this burger. I'm going to delete the portion of this that I don't need, the non-exposed part. And to do that, all I have to do is mask. So I'm going to take my mask pen, start with the top one, and just mask everything in view. I probably want to create a duplicate of this. It's so low. That's pretty good. I'll sharpen mask, and then I will duplicate. And actually, just to be safe, just in case I've left any pockets out, I'm going to grow mask a few times and then sharpen. This way, if there's any areas in there that are not selected. Okay, and I'm going to duplicate just so I have a copy. And then I'm going to group the masked area, isolate it. Okay, and I can delete hidden. So I'll do the same thing to this bottom. Isolate the surface and delete hidden. So now I have the two pieces that are going to be used to extract the fluid meshes. The next thing I'm going to do is take this piece and mask by cavity, because that's where I'm going to extract the fluids from. So I'm going to go masking, and with a blur value of 2, mask by cavity. Everywhere you see black is where we'd have fluid. Now that's a lot. It's going to be a very complex mesh. I'm going to switch this to a flat color, so you see what is going to be generated. It's going to be a fairly difficult mesh to manage. It's really, really dense. And all the fluids I want to extract, I want them to be airtight meshes, so they're double-sided. I think it will react. The transmission settings work better when you have an airtight mesh rather than just a singular one-sided mesh. It produces more complex visual interaction. I'm going to go to the subtool menu and go extract 0.0001, fairly small. So it took several minutes, but this is the result. It's really complicated. I wish it wasn't this complicated. That's a lot of liquid. First thing I'm going to do is smooth it a bit. So I'm going to start smoothing it so that the edges collapse. One more. Yeah, it's fairly dense. Very interested to see how Maya deals with it. So I'm going to keep that, call it fluid mesh, upper patty, top patty. So here's one for the bottom bun. I work with a lot of meshes like this, and more likely than not, it does have a handful of errors. In an attempt to get all these masks, it'll definitely produce some geometry with zero length edges or some other weird type of error geometry. But as long as it doesn't impact the rendering, it's fine. This is a high resolution asset that is intended for rendering in Maya. I will try sometime towards the end of this lesson. I was planning on taking the entire asset to Blender and Unreal Engine and trying to render. If this mesh gives me a problem, I'm going to have to come back and fix it. So I'm going to go back into deformation and give this one also a fair amount of smoothing to soften the edges. All right, so that's the two fluid meshes for the burger. I don't think this is going to be that much help. Display properties and the BPR settings, you can attempt to render transparency in ZBrush. So I'm going to turn on transparency for the bottom one. I just want to see what this mesh is producing in the way of transparency. So it wants to turn on the transparent render property in the render settings. I'll say yes. And I'm just going to hit BPR to see what I get. It's probably not going to do much here. These are not, it's not a powerful transparency settings. It's fairly simple. Yeah, it's doing something. See some type of highlighting, some weird highlighting. Yeah, but this is really not doing it justice, but I just thought it was worth trying. To create the main fluid mesh, I'm going to need this copy of the patty, this little copy that I extracted from, but I think I feel safer using this original duplicate. I think that's why I duplicated it. So I'm going to bring it down. This is the whole thing that was dynameshed. And I'm going to do the same for the top one, whole one, and bring it down. And I need some additional things. I need the cheese at the bottom. I'm going to create a duplicate of that. Bring it down. Take it down one subdivision level so it's not so high. I can delete lower. I don't need the higher subdivision levels. And another thing I need is also this. Actually, no, what I need is this bun, this lower bun here. So I'm going to duplicate it. And what these four meshes are going to do is be unified into one mesh that I can paint on to create the fluid mesh. So I'm going to put all of them, actually I could just go ahead and merge all of them right now. So I'll just merge down. So this is the end result. And this is what I'm going to be painting on. And just like I did with the chunks, I'm going to weld all of these into one mesh, and I'm going to use Dynamesh for that. So I'm going to go with 4K active and Dynamesh with this resolution dot open. I'm going to go to Dynamesh, and I'm not really expecting that much of the detail to be retained, and I don't really care for it to be retained that much. I just want an averaging of all these pieces and a surface that can be painted on. Okay, so this is it, and I did significantly better than I thought. So this is one singular mesh now. So I'm going to start the painting process, and I'm going to be starting from this bottom area here. Let me clear all masks, turn off Dynamesh. I'm going to be starting from this bottom here, and so I can paint on all the surfaces to create this fluid mesh. And I'm going to come around here to the sauce at the bottom. I don't want to go beyond that because when I look at the reference, I don't see too much of the fluid going down beyond this sauce. So the cheese is kind of stopping here. The liquidated cheese, that is, in the juice from the meat, is kind of stopping around there. So I'm not going to go too far down. What I do here though is very important because I'm going to have to sculpt very well to showcase how this fluid is sort of hanging off of these reefs, or lack of a better term to describe them. It's hanging very interestingly. Even with this, I'm going to be controlling which part of this fluid mesh is even visible with an opacity map, because I cannot have this entire shaded region covered in fluid. It just wouldn't look too real that all the cheese is coated in it. So I will be painting a map, an opacity map, to tell it where to exist and where not to exist. So that opacity map will make the viewer see right through the fluid mesh sometimes to see what's behind it. All right, so here's the entire mask. I'm gonna just paint over a little bit because I'm sure I've left some spots out. It's gonna be hard to get all of them. So I'll do a little bit of growing on the mask to capture all those spots. And sharpen the mask too. All right, and I will extract this at say 0.00. Let's see what that produces. That is not bad. Let me accept it. So that is interesting. I'm going to get rid of this inner shell. It's a fairly complicated mesh. I'm going to delete hidden. And I'm going to try to simplify just a little bit, not too much. I don't want too much simplification here. So I'm going to try to dynamesh it at a high number, see what it produces. That's not bad, but I probably want just a little bit more complexity, so I'll go higher. Yes, something like this. Let me undo it so I can always retreat to this mesh. I'll duplicate and yes, go to that 2000 mark and dynamesh. Okay, so this is what I'm going to be playing with. Now I don't need these, this inner shell and the one at the bottom because it created them, so I'll just go delete hidden. And so, all right, so now it's time to sculpt. Over here, most of these, how they peel off of the patty should be left as is. The opacity, as I mentioned, is going to be feathered. So I'll be painting an opacity map in Substance, or I might try a test next lesson. I'll UV this thing and I'll paint feather opacity to break up how it's connecting here to this meat. And that will really make it look realistic, make this feel really real, like fluid, as long as I do it well. But there are some areas where there are crevices, there are deep crevices. So you take an area like this, right here. This is a very planar fluid section. And you see how straight it is, draping down from the meat onto the cheese. And it's where there are these gaps, like these big gaps. And not necessarily where they're the gaps, but there are select areas where it's there. It's also here. It's also this planar feel that it has over here. But in some areas it is flowing into the crevice and it's not this. I'm going to use my flattened brush and I'm going to use it as a subtract. So what that's just going to do is just going to pull things out. All right, I can smooth a little bit and then I'll do it. Yeah, and then it produces this more planar result like that. So then that fluid is going to be a lot more planar. All right, so a place like that is good to have it right there too. This would be good to have it, so I'll smooth this out. Pull this out, get that planar feel of that. And I think I should leave the edges intact. Flowing down onto the cheese, make this one a lot bigger. Okay, so I'm gonna go around and pick these strategic areas where that's going to be the case. Yeah, this is definitely one in the area where I want to have it. So I'm gonna soften that. And here too. Planar. Okay, that should suffice. That's a lot of them. As long as they're hanging properly, that's what matters. Here, I'm going to push this in so it's more flush with the surface. And then the next thing I want to deal with is how this is transitioning. A lot of it is also going to be controlled by the feathering, but I feel like I should be smoothing this out so that it has a better transition. So I'm going to just go around and do like a smoothing. See if a careful smoothing of this is gonna help. Yeah, I do have to smooth these edges just a little bit to lose how very sharp they are. So I'm gonna go through this top area very carefully. The averaging that is produced from Dynamission is good. It just does a lot of relaxing, and that's never gonna hurt. All right, so that's the whole thing. Now what I'm going to do is turn off Dynamesh, divide it till I have a fairly smooth result. That's good enough. Duplicate it and create a low resolution version that I can project. I think ZRemesh is going to break because it doesn't like these open-ended meshes. I'm going to delete higher to lose that, and then I'm going to close holes, and it should give me a different poly group there, which is great because I want to get rid of it when I'm done remeshing. I will come down to geometry under ZRemesher and say keep groups, and then tell it to give me a 5K retop. It had a remeshing error, and that might have something to do with the fact that this close holes created a mesh that's really not that good. So I'm going to Dynamesh it as is. I'm going to go, that should create a better mesh, a nice close tight mesh. So I'm going to go Dynamesh. Okay, so I did that, and I'm going to try ZRemeshing again. Okay, it's running into issues because there's something wrong with this mesh. I'm going to try to simplify the mesh more by doing some more Dynameshing. So I'll go to a lower number and keep going lower as I remesh, lower still. And this might be a little too low. Well, it doesn't really matter, it's a remesh, so I'm gonna start somewhere and end up with a mesh that I'll subdivide and project detail onto. So this should suffice. This should be fine, but just to be sure that I get a cleaner mesh, I'm gonna go ZRemesh. All right, so it gives me this, and I'm really only looking for the outer shell. So I can delete hidden. And now it's time to project the data from this mesh, this high resolution mesh, onto this, what is our final mesh. I'm going to put some of these meshes away. This is the original extraction. It's high resolution. This is a softer version. I might do some interesting kind of projection for that final mesh that I get, to get some of this data back. And I feel like some of it might be useful. What I'll do is select areas. So I want to start the projection process. So I'll start with this mesh, projecting data from this mesh. Let me see how they're aligned. Not too well at all. Let's see. This might not be the best projection. So I'll divide, project. That's not too bad. Divide, project. Yeah, it's not that bad. Divide, project. And I think I should have gotten enough information. Yeah, I think I've gotten enough. So I'll hide that, and I think this is what I'm going to settle on. I will give it a few more subdivision levels because I know it's going to need a displacement map. And what's left for me to do is sculpt the unique detail that is exclusive to this fluid mesh. So it's going to be droplets and some other things that I'm going to do. But I did mention that I would be trying to project some of this data back into it. And it's more so the data on the meat here. So if I go solo, there's a lot of meat information here. I wonder if it'll be more beneficial for the fluid to wrap around the meat a lot more. So I will mask these areas where there's meat. All right, so that's about enough. I'm going to blur the mask. I'm going to go to a lower subdivision level blur. Okay, and come back high, invert the mask, and go project to get some of that information back. Yeah, so we got most of that meaty information back. Now, let me hide this. This is our new fluid mesh. And it's time to paint the droplets and interesting things onto it. I actually made a mistake with that projection. If you notice how the fluid drapes over the bottom patty here, it's very loose, like it's not flush with it. It's really flowing, and there's a lot of also some of that planar behavior, but more so it's not wrapping around it loosely. It's kind of flowing down and producing this type of effect. So it's cloaking it. So I'm going to undo that projection. I don't want the fluid mesh to be that flush with the meat. So I'm going to undo a few times. Let me make sure I'm on the fluid mesh. Okay, and hit undo. Yeah, I want this loose. All right, I'm going to unmask. And now it's time to do some sculpting. I'm going to start with what are droplets, very small droplets. And I'm wondering whether I should initiate the droplets with some kind of spraying and then no, let me do the flowing droplets first. So I'm just going to duplicate this mesh. Just name it fluid mesh main. Apply and grab my build up brush. I'll go to lower subdivision level, not that low. Let's see if I can start creating some flowy forms like that, very thin. Probably need to be a little higher. Like there. I like some flowing fluid. Something different from surface it's on the cheese, the meat, and very clearly a fluid, like a droplet. And I obviously cannot just count on this to sell it. I do have to do some more interesting partitioning, which I can do with also the Damien standard. Let's see, trying a lower subdivision level. Yes. That flowy behavior can also be simulated with Damien standard. And I should be able to try a test here. If I was to, just to see what it's gonna behave. I could turn on BPR, transparent shading. As I mentioned, forget this lip and this lip. They're gonna be feathered with opacity shading. So very good opacity paint work in Substance or in ZBrush. Yeah, it is transparent and everything's showing through. And yeah, as long as this mesh is getting data that is distinguishable from its underlying mass, it's good. It's turning out great so far. I do think it needs a lot more interest. I do want to keep in mind that it's fluid, so it also has to be silky smooth. So unfortunately, I don't want to go with too much of a noisy pattern, but there is some noise, droplet noise, which I'm going to put on shortly with a spray brush. I think it will mix well with these striations. I'm going to subdivide this thing higher for the next stage. So I'm going to divide. 7 million should be good. And it's on 7 million that I'm going to add a layer and call it droplets. And then I'm going to take my standard brush, go to color spray and grab alpha 40. And it produces some cool spraying-like effect that feels like water droplets. I'm going to vary the size. I do want a huge amount of density. Let's see what it looks like with BPR shade, just to see if it catches light as it should. Yeah, it has this like droplet feel, but I would definitely have to go over it several times and really vary the size so they're not all the same. I'm going to try to vary the size now as I just give it a coat, and then I'll just keep going over it. Yeah, just I'm going to reduce and increase my brush size from here. See what it looks like. All right, that's fairly interesting. But again, this is not an easy thing to visualize right now. I really have to see it in its final environment. But those droplets are feeling good here. Until next lesson when I'm running tests, and even further if I am painting over this, because a lot of this is going to receive some opaque regions that's partially liquidated cheese. So it's not just all fluid. Some of these areas is going to be cheese. So I'm really gonna have to wait to see how this is going to impact the final piece. And as I mentioned, if I need to make any changes, I come back, smooth things out, and push my displacement and normal mass back out. So this one is really going to have to wait. I'm going to go in there, and just so I don't have this layered feel, I'm going to do some additional sculpting on the surface so that it just mixes a little bit better. It doesn't all feel all layered. It helps to break it up a bit. So I'm going to hold off on doing too much on this so I can see how it behaves. All right, so that's it for this lesson. That's all I'm doing in this lesson. And in the next lesson, I'm going to be in Maya. Actually, there is one more thing that I wanted to do when I look at the reference. This fluid here, this sauce, it seems to be extending. This sauce in this little gap seems to be latched onto more than just that ground over there. So I'm considering extracting just a little bit more of it to go around. All right, yeah, that's enough to catch highlight, and I'll adjust it as I see fit. So it looks like I almost forgot about the charred meat particles on everything down here. So starting around, I already got the charred meat on this. I should shade it. If I go to the top patty chunks, this charred meat here, I'm just going to duplicate this. Just call it render, just so I can know that I colored it for rendering purposes. I don't like filling in color too much with my main pieces. Sometimes ZBrush misbehaves and makes it very difficult for you to get them off. So I'm going to take this and just pick somewhat darker color and just go fill object. Maybe not too dark. Yeah, I don't like that because the material already has dark cavities. And I am also going to hide my fluid meshes for now for the meat so I can see my detail better. Get this done. So I'm going to take this piece and solo, and I'm looking to mask. Basically, I'm looking for this type of density. This stuff. Some large, some small, but there's a lot of them on the cheese. These ones look like they're sitting on the fluid mesh, so I might need to. These ones are sitting on the burger. I just want to make sure that they're big enough that they protrude to the fluid mesh, but it comes all the way down here to the bun, so I'm going to really have to pick random spots on all of these to get. It's just basically masking. Try to keep the spacing. And I should probably pick a more interesting shape. I'm going to find a large abstract shape. One of these will suffice. Something like this. Or maybe this one. This one's a lot larger. Not too much down here, a lot more in the cheese than anything. Right, I'm going to extract them. Come down here to extract 0.001, extract. It's fairly large, so I'll go 0.0005. I definitely have to do some type of smoothing. Yeah, they're a good size. Might be. Yeah, it's a fairly good size, and they're super granular ones. I might just paint them in. To help me visualize it, I'll take the same color, call this bottom half charred meat. I'll put this surface back into the trash. I'll just duplicate this, call it render, sample this color, and fill object. Put everything back, see what it looks like. Yeah, that's about right. It looks like there's some really granular ones which will definitely have to go in with paint. I was unsuccessful trying to create the super small ones, so I might have to lose some of these large ones. Maybe I have enough, but there's a lot of large ones. Now, envisioning the smaller ones coming in, so I will solo other group and just take out some of them before the next lesson, just exclude them on case by case basis, because there's quite a few, specifically on this. Should be enough. I'll go delete hidden. And I'll stick with this. I'll turn on that fluid mesh. Do a render. See what things are looking like. It just occurred to me that that second fluid mesh I did for the burger at the bottom, I might want to lose it, but I'll see how it works. It just feels excessive to have that and then this draping one, but honestly, that's a lot of water. That's a lot of fluid if they both them are combined, but I'll see what to discard and what not to discard. So before I move on, I do want to mention that I have optimized these fluid meshes. This is the original one that I extracted and kept, and it's about 4 million. I dynameshed it to get a simpler version, right? So this is a significantly simpler version. This is the comparison. I don't think it'll make that much of a difference. And I think it sort of rearranges it in a way that makes it not just align itself directly to the cavities. And I think that is not gonna hurt. I think it's creating some interesting shapes, and it's definitely lower in poly count, so I think it'll be better. All right, that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, I'll be taking all this stuff to Maya and testing out the fluid meshes. This will be an initial test. Whatever I get from that is not necessarily going to let me know if the fluid meshes are going to work. If I manage to finish the testing process in a timely manner, then I'll start resurfacing and UVing this asset in preparation for texturing in Substance Painter.